Şanlıurfa, Turkey, October 1994. While plowing his field, shepherd Savak Yildiz spots a strangely shaped stone protruding from the ground. After brushing away the dirt, he realizes that it may be part of a much larger object. Shortly after contacting the local museum with his find, he is visited by Klaus Schmidt from the German Archaeological Institute.
It wasn't until German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt visited the site and began digging. They realized what was really at this site.
What he discovered was mind-blowing. After discovering the first T-shaped pillar buried at the site, he soon found more of these massive structures.
During the intensive dig, Schmidt and his team begin to unearth dozens of additional giant stone monoliths covered in intricate carvings, some weighing as much as 20 tons.
The site of Göbekli Tepe is a series of circular enclosures, but then in the center of each enclosure you have two particularly big T-shaped pillars of limestone sort of facing each other. Now, many of these pillars have remarkable carvings on them, wonderful carvings and bas-reliefs of animals, birds, insects, all kinds of things. So to fashion those and carve them and set them up in these structures was just absolutely amazing.
Archaeologists estimate that it would have taken a team of 50 men an entire week to move just one of the monolithic pillars from the limestone quarry to the top of the hill where they stand today, and over 300 hours to carve the bas-reliefs. At this rate, each of the 5 stone circles unearthed so far would have required a full year to be completed. But why such a monumental site was built in the first place remains a mystery.
It's very difficult to know what the purpose of something like Göbekli Tepe could be. And certainly Klaus Schmidt had not reached any conclusions, except that it's clearly not a settlement, it's not a village. There is absolutely no domestic refuse. Schmidt always hoped that it was funerary and that there would be burials underneath the walls or underneath some of the pillars or so on, but so far they have not yet found any human remains at the site. There are no domestic plants in the site, there are only wild animal bones. Inevitably in archaeology, if we don't know what something is for, we think of ritual, but really it's pure speculation.
Intrigued by evidence that the structure might go back to a Neolithic period, Klaus Schmidt has the sediment layers of the site radiocarbon dated. The results indicated that the stone structures could be as much as 12,000 years old, more than 5,000 years older than mankind's first known civilization in Mesopotamia. More than that, it would place the construction of Göbekli Tepe to a time when mainstream scholars suggest humans were roaming the earth as hunter-gatherers.
Well, the site of Göbekli Tepe really did send shockwaves through the whole world of early prehistory, because we'd never before known or imagined even that simple hunter-gatherers could produce such spectacular monumental structures. Now, in archaeology, really since it began, we've always assumed that hunter-gatherers were capable of producing wonderful works of art, rock art, cave art, and things like that, but we never imagined that they could come together in sufficient numbers to make monumental constructions like Göbekli Tepe.
But if the currently accepted timeline for mankind's advancement is correct, is it possible that primitive hunter-gatherers could have built such sophisticated megalithic structures? Ancient astronaut theorists say no, and instead suggest that Göbekli Tepe was built by the survivors of a lost society, one that was almost entirely wiped out by a worldwide cataclysm. And to support their claim, they point to recent evidence of a catastrophic event which many mainstream scientists believe occurred at the very end of the last ice age, which is believed to have lasted from roughly 108,000 BC until nearly 10,000 BC.
Göbekli Tepe could be the smoking gun of a lost civilization because it confirms that at the time of the last ice age, there was high culture existing in the world. This is something that had been speculated for many years, but there had not been the absolute evidence. Now we could have it. These engineering skills, this ordering of society is something that must have existed before the end of the last ice age, and arguably even earlier.
When you look at the time frame of Göbekli Tepe, it was built right after these huge catastrophes at the end of the last ice age. And it would seem that the builders were people who had survived and had the knowledge and technology to build something like this.
Karahan Tepe is really something quite spectacular.
Absolutely.
Authors Andrew Collins and Hugh Newman have spent decades investigating ancient sites around the world and have made multiple trips to Karahan Tepe in southeast Turkey.
In the last couple of years, they've uncovered it. Only a small amount, but enough to provide some remarkable insights into what was going on here in southeast Turkey.
Absolutely. I mean, it's like this is pieces of a jigsaw that's just waiting to be put together.
In September 2022, Andrew and Hugh traveled to the site together in search of further clues as to just who built it and why. Upon their arrival at Karahan Tepe, Andrew and Hugh were joined by local researcher Taha Ozyavaz.
Taha,
Hi, Andrew.
nice to meet you.
Thank you.
This is
Nice.
Hugh.
Hi, Hugh. Welcome to Karahan Tepe.
Thank you, and good to meet you. I'm absolutely astounded by this site, how vast it is, how immaculate it is, and how it is just literally one of the most astonishing places I've ever visited.
We are seeing also only 1% of the site has been excavated, and we are seeing only now this tip of iceberg.
But this is just enormous, everything that's here. We can see T-pillars going in every direction. And just think what is below our feet right now.
There are really very well carved pits and well carved pillars, around 200 T-shaped pillars, and some of them are visible on the surface.
And if you do compare it to Göbekli Tepe, it's got the T-pillars, it's got the enclosures, it's got the remarkable 3D relief carving, the statues, the serpents, and everything else.
There are incredible images of different animals and creatures of the natural world. What do they mean?
Most mainstream scholars identify the sites of Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe as temples of worship. Others have suggested that the round enclosures may have been used as corrals for animals, and that the T-shaped pillars once supported roofs. However, Klaus Schmidt, the archaeologist behind the excavation of Göbekli Tepe in the 1990s, was certain that the T-shaped pillars represent human forms, but with some curious features.
I think what we see when we look at these T-shaped pillars is abstract human beings, basically. The heads are the actual T-shaped terminations. The stems of the stones are the bodies. Sometimes we see belts around them. But what's so weird about these is that the arms here almost seem like an abstract animal as well. Perhaps a bird, perhaps a snake.
On the side of the T-shape, we do see the arm. And if we go down, we're going to see the hand and the fingers. This is the interesting part of the hand. It has 8 fingers, and it was carved perfectly.
That is intriguing. And this is a tradition we find linked with giants all around the world. Even in the Bible, we have the giant of Gath that had extra fingers. We have stories of Goliath and his family having extra fingers. We have stories of great Irish giant gods having extra digits as well.
And the fact that the Watchers, the Nephilim and the Anunnaki would seem to be associated with the mythology of this region suggests to us that They could be one of the builders of Karahan Tepe.
According to the Bible's book of Genesis, prior to the Great Flood, angels known as the Watchers defied God's will and came down to earth to live among humans. These otherworldly beings mated with their human subjects, producing a race of hybrid human giants that were known as the Nephilim.
One of the most tantalizing small tidbits in the Hebrew Bible is found in the opening verses of Genesis chapter 6, where we hear the story of the Nephilim, who are described as basically being the hybrid offspring of humans and divine beings who are called the sons of God.
Who were these sons of God? Legend expands and tells us that they were rebellious angels. But yet we must understand angels to not be spiritual beings, but very tangibly physical, or else how could they take human wives and bear children? Now, the children of these sons of God and human women became known as the hybrids called the fallen ones, in Hebrew, the Nephilim. They existed in the days before Noah.
Aside from the Bible, religious texts that talk about these demigods, these hybrids, are the Hindu Upanishads. And if we look at Sumer, again, gods coming down from the earth, fraternizing with the natives, which are us, and creating a new race of people, half human and half extraterrestrial gods.
Yes, we can speculate. Were those who were to become known as the sons of God originally inhabitants of a place like Karahan?
Central Anatolia, Turkey. 300 miles from the ancient site of Göbekli Tepe, December 28, 2014. A local crew excavating for an urban renovation project stumbles across a strange series of carved rooms and tunnels deep underground. Upon further exploration, they find the subterranean network spans several miles and extends hundreds of feet below the surface of the Earth, much like the nearby caves of Derinkuyu.
What they discovered was that these caves extended for a distance of 370 feet down into the rock.
Archaeologists estimate that more than 5 million square feet of rock, the volume of over 370 Olympic-sized swimming pools, was removed to carve out this subterranean city. Yet there is no evidence of the extracted material in the area. This mysterious cave system is still under excavation and closed to the public. But in June 2017, author and researcher Andrew Collins was granted access to the site.
The sheer size of some of these rooms is absolutely amazing. I mean, this one that we're in now is 120 feet in length, and yet it's just one of hundreds of similar rooms that we find inside this great hill. These tunnels that you see seem to go on, and yet what's incredible is that not only were they full of people, but there was also livestock down here. And we're told that as many as 20,000 people, perhaps even as much as 60,000, could have lived here at any one time.
Not only is there evidence that these caves once housed thousands of people, but archaeologists have found air vents and water wells that would have made it possible to live underground for years at a time.
These were cut deeply into the rock, sometimes for hundreds of yards in depth. And at the base of them were wells that provided water to these underground populations. This is what is known as a self-sealing door. And they're in fact huge great stone wheels made of a volcanic rock known as basalt. And their function was that they would be wheeled into position so that they would lock, so that nobody was able to get inside the underground cities.
When it was discovered, historians recovered artifacts that suggest the cave system was used by the early Christians to escape persecution. So they dated the site to be approximately 1,500 years old. But based on new evidence, the caves might be much older.
A few years ago, I interviewed an archaeologist by the name of Omar Demir, and he found within it Paleolithic tools that went back at least 10 to 12,000 years, and arguably even earlier still.
Bordered on the north by the Black Sea and by the Taurus Mountains to the south, lies Cappadocia in central Turkey. Here, wind and water have sculpted strange shapes out of the soft volcanic rock. Rock which ancient peoples once turned into small primitive dwellings. In more recent years, the site has seen the construction of more modern structures. But in 1963, a simple home renovation in the town of Derinkuyu led to an extraordinary discovery when a cave wall was opened, revealing a passageway to an underground city thousands of years old and more than 280 feet deep.
I've been there on multiple occasions, and it's incredible because there's 13 stories that go deep into the ground with ventilation shafts and 15,000 little shafts that bring air to even the deepest of levels.
Incredibly, the number of rock rooms that were found could hold over 20,000 men, women, and children. There was even evidence of religious centers, storerooms, wine presses, and stables for livestock.
Oh, Derinkuyu would have been a massive undertaking for anyone, even in modern times, with modern equipment. But in those days, it would have been stupendous, equal to the pyramids. At Derinkuyu, because of the softness of the stone, you had to be very careful that you provided enough pillar strength to support the floors above, otherwise you'd have catastrophic cave-ins. Surprisingly, there's no evidence of any catastrophic cave-ins, so they were apparently extremely clever and knew their material. We're talking deep antiquity. It is mind-boggling to understand how they could have done this. Perhaps they had help from some other civilization.
But just who built this massive underground city? And what mysterious force drove them to live underground?
Why would people want to live deep underground in these weird caverns like that? It seems kind of scary, really.
According to many archaeologists and scholars, Derinkuyu was most likely intended to serve as a temporary shelter from invasion. Built around 800 BC by the Phrygians, a Bronze Age people related to the Trojans. Others believe it was built by the Hittites, a warrior people mentioned in the Bible who flourished hundreds of years earlier. But could the underground city be even older? According to ancient astronaut theorists, it is. Perhaps by many thousands of years.
The Cappadocia region of Turkey was part of the Zoroastrian Empire, which was Persian in nature. And it's one of the oldest religious traditions on the face of the earth.
The Zoroastrian religion, an ancient faith based on opposing forces of good and evil, is widely believed to have influenced both Hinduism and Judeo-Christianity. Founded sometime before the 6th century BC, Its chief god is the creator, Ahura Mazda. And in the second chapter of the Zoroastrian sacred text, the Vendidad, Ahura Mazda saves mankind from a worldwide environmental disaster, much like the story of Noah in the Hebrew Testament.
The great prophet Yima, he was instructed to build a kind of underground refuge similar to Derinkuyu by the sky god Ahura Mazda.
According to the sacred texts, Yima built a multi-level underground city to protect a select group of people and animals, not from a flood, but from a global ice age. The Vendidad calls this the evil winters. According to many mainstream climatologists, the last ice age peaked around 18,000 years ago and ended around 10,000 BC. Is it possible that Derinkuyu was built as a refuge from a devastating global winter?
Since you cannot carbon date stone, it's anybody's guess how old Derinkuyu really is. And my question is, if we have a Zoroastrian story that's very similar, could it be that both that place and Derinkuyu are much, much older than what we've believed so far?